they were doing, which is, I think, is the beauty of that record, is why it sounds like the way it is. Everyone's just, we got in there, we're like, 1, 2, 3, 4, go. Like, nobody really thought much about anything. Nobody overthought anything. Everybody just played.
Mick Mars, the guitarist who played a pivotal role in creating the legendary sound of Motley Crue, did so through emotionally powerful playing, haunting riffs, and relentless endurance. He was the quiet, driving musical force behind the band. Born with ankylosing spondylitis, Mars didn't move with ease or pride, he moved with silent strength and rare, unwavering determination. When Motley Crue soared to fame with sold-out shows and world-shaking anthems, few knew that the quiet figure at the corner of the stage was enduring constant, severe pain. After 4 decades of commitment to one of the most iconic bands in rock history, he departed amid legal battles and bitterness, a lifetime of loyalty met with betrayal from those he once called brothers. How did the once essential heart of Motley Crue become a forgotten shadow? And what inner fire drove him to rise and carve out a new path after such a painful fall? Born Robert Allen Deal on May 4, 1951, in Terre Haute, Indiana, Mick Mars came from a poor, working-class family. His parents, Tina and Frank Deal, moved the family to Garden Grove, California, in search of a better future. Mars grew up in a cramped house with 4 siblings, surrounded by instability. Even as a child, Mars stood out. When he was just 3 years old, his parents took him to a small local fair. There, he saw country singer Skeeter Bond performing under bright lights with a guitar, a moment that left a lasting impression. Once home, the young boy announced, "This will be my life." When he turned 12, his parents gave him a cheap guitar. It wasn't much, but to Mars, it meant everything. While other kids played sports and went to parties, he spent hours alone, learning to play by mimicking Elvis Presley and surf rock legends like Dick Dale. At the same time, his health began to show troubling signs. At 14, he started experiencing sharp pain at the base of his spine, something he didn't understand and kept to himself. Throughout high school, he was small, slightly hunched, and completely immersed in music. He joined a local band called the Jades, initially playing bass before switching to lead guitar. From school events to smoky dive bars, Mars tirelessly developed his skills, scraping together his dream bit by bit. At 18, disaster struck. A workplace accident injured his hand severely, an incident that could have ended his musical ambitions before they really began. But Mars refused to give up. He quit the job, dropped out of school, and left behind any thought of a safe or conventional life. All he wanted was to play guitar. Though the pain from his illness worsened, he kept performing night after night, even as his body screamed in protest. At an age when most were still dreaming, Mars already knew his journey wouldn't be easy, it would be a constant fight. With a frail frame, injured hands, and a body slowly breaking down, he still refused to walk away from the path he had chosen. What gave Mick Mars the strength to keep going when the odds were so heavily stacked against him? Mars's early career was filled with setbacks and hard lessons. After leaving manual labor behind, he joined various bar bands around Southern California, playing blues rock in gritty clubs for barely enough money to eat. One of the more significant bands he played with was White Horse, which helped him gain traction in LA's underground rock scene. His electrifying guitar style, flawless riff work, and raw, emotional solos quickly caught attention. Some even compared him to another rising star in the scene, Eddie Van Halen. But when White Horse chose to switch to disco in hopes of commercial success, Mars didn't hesitate to leave. He knew he wasn't meant to follow trends, he needed something with real grit and intensity. Over the next few years, he played with a number of pop acts, releasing a handful of unsuccessful singles before realizing he needed to start over completely. He shaved off his recognizable mustache, dyed his hair black, and reinvented himself as a darker, edgier persona. Most importantly, he changed his name from Robert Allen Deal to Mick Mars, a full rebirth of both his identity and his musical direction. Would you like the next part of his story covering how Motley Crue was formed in his later career? In April 1980, Mick Mars placed an ad in the Recycler newspaper that read, "Loud, rude, aggressive guitarist available." Just a few days later, Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee, 2 driven young musicians, reached out to him. They were instantly drawn to Mars's icy presence, piercing gaze, and thunderous guitar style. It was Mars who suggested the name Mötley Crüe, inspired by a comment someone had once made about White Horse being a motley-looking crew. The name, combined with their aggressive sound and rebellious attitude, quickly gained attention. From the very first rehearsals, when Mars's guitar came to life, the band knew they'd found the missing piece. Mars wasn't just another guitarist, he was the core of their sound, the force that grounded a group on the edge of exploding into stardom. He was in his early 30s, limping from spinal issues, playing alongside 3 hungry 20-somethings. The question was, could he not only keep up but also lead them to greatness? Mötley Crüe's rise was fast and explosive. Formed in 1981 during the heyday of the Sunset Strip metal scene, they immediately stood out. Their raw energy, rebellious image, and aggressive music caught attention. But what truly gave them weight was Mick Mars's deep, icy guitar tone. He was the sound's backbone in those early days. Their debut album, Too Fast for Love, 1981, initially self-released, was full of Mars's signature sound, simple, unforgettable riffs and strong hooks that gave shape to the band's wild energy. The album helped them build a strong fan base and led to a deal with Elektra Records in 1982. The turning point came with Shout at the Devil in 1983. Mars developed a heavier, darker tone, fusing traditional hard rock with intense metal. Songs like Looks That Kill and Too Young to Fall in Love showed how he could command an audience with just a few riffs. Between 1985 and 1987, Mötley Crüe hit their commercial peak. Theater of Pain, 1985, featured Home Sweet Home, a ballad elevated by Mars's restrained and emotional playing. Girls, 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 1987, pushed their bad boy image to the limit, with Mars delivering gritty, blues-soaked performances on tracks like Wild Side and You're All I Need. In 1989, they released Dr. Feelgood, their most successful album. Produced by Bob Rock, it topped the Billboard 200. Mars's guitar work reached new heights in both skill and emotional depth. Tracks like Kickstart My Heart and Without You combined raw energy with smooth, powerful solos. Through all of it, Mick Mars held the band together musically, even as the others descended into addiction, controversy, and media drama. Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee were usually in the spotlight during interviews. Vince Neil was the band's frontman. But it was Mars who shaped their chaos into real music, both live and in the studio. Meanwhile, his body was slowly breaking down from ankylosing spondylitis. Every year he became more hunched, his movements slowed. After each show, while his bandmates celebrated, Mars would retreat to his room, silently dealing with pain that never left. Few people know that Mars mostly stayed away from the wild partying that defined Mötley Crüe's image. He was the only member who avoided major scandals. But this also created distance between him and the rest of the band. Fame hit like a tidal wave, but for Mars, it came with a private battle, for his place in the band and for his survival. As Mötley Crüe climbed the charts, Mars's body was slowly failing. Diagnosed at 17 with ankylosing spondylitis, a chronic spine disease, he lived in constant pain. What began as backaches became sleepless nights and brutal mornings. The disease didn't just limit his movement, it deformed him, causing him to lose nearly 7 centimeters in height. But Mars never let the pain show. On stage, under the lights, he stood still, head lowered, gripping his guitar like it was holding him upright. Touring was agony, long flights, constant travel, endless shows. For someone whose spine was literally fusing together, every day was a battle. Still, he rarely spoke of it. He endured in silence, concealing his pain behind a quiet strength. Unlike his bandmates who indulged heavily in alcohol, drugs, and non-stop partying, Mick Mars led a quiet and reserved life. He didn't form close friendships with Vince Neil or Tommy Lee and had little connection with Nikki Sixx outside of their shared music. For over 20 years, Mars remained a solitary presence within the very band he helped to create. In the band's autobiography, The Dirt, Mars revealed that he had experienced deep depression. During that time, he turned to heavy drinking to dull his pain, eventually becoming addicted to opioid painkillers. One night, In a drunken and desperate state, he walked into the ocean, intending to end his life. He later woke up drenched and freezing, unsure if he was still alive or had already become a ghost. His illness eventually required him to have hip replacement surgery in the 1990s. Although the physical pain eased, the emotional isolation persisted. Unlike his bandmates, Mars was never hounded by the press or splashed across magazine covers. To many, he was the quiet one, the outsider, the mysterious figure in the background of Motley Crue. But it was his guitar that gave the band its soul and identity. For more than 40 years, he fought against illness, against isolation, and for recognition, without ever giving in. In 2022, after decades of touring and struggling with a debilitating illness, Mars made the difficult decision to step back from touring, as his body could no longer keep up. However, he made it clear he wasn't quitting the band entirely and was willing to contribute through recordings, one-off performances, and other non-touring activities. Shockingly, just a day later, Motley Crue publicly announced that Mars had retired and would be replaced by guitarist John Five. There was no conversation, no agreement, just a cold statement. Realizing he had been forced out, Mars chose not to stay silent this time. In early 2023, he filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court against Nikki Sixx, Vince Neil, and Tommy Lee. He accused them of conspiring to push him out of the band's business affairs and coercing him into selling his 25% ownership stake in the band's corporate entity at an unfairly low price. Mars also demanded full transparency and access to the band's financial records, which he claimed had been intentionally hidden for years. The details he revealed in the lawsuit were explosive. He accused Nikki Sixx of not playing bass live on tour and said that Vince Neil's vocals and Tommy Lee's drumming also relied heavily on backing tracks. He claimed Sixx used his influence to diminish Mars's reputation, questioning his abilities and leading the charge to declare him unfit, all in an effort to take over his share of the band's profits. Beyond the financial blow, Mars also suffered personal humiliation. He was mocked for his age, his health condition, and even his personal relationships. The very band that once felt like home had now become the entity trying to erase his existence. In response, the band stated that their prior agreements stipulated that any members stepping away from touring would forfeit their share of related revenues. They argued Mars no longer had a claim. But for Mars, the fight wasn't just about money, it was about dignity and the right to be acknowledged for the sacrifices he had made for the band's legacy. After months of litigation, Mars saw a partial victory. The court ordered Motley Crue to cover his legal expenses for withholding documents and confirmed his right to access the band's financial records up to the year 2022. Though the case remains unresolved, Mars made his stance unmistakably clear: he will not be silenced or robbed of what he rightfully earned. Even if he stands alone, even if he's left behind, he will keep fighting, just as he always has. Leaving Motley Crue wasn't the end for Mick Mars. It marked the beginning of a powerful new chapter. As the lawsuit played out, Mars retreated to his private studio in Nashville. Freed from the pressure of maintaining an image or catering to commercial trends, he finally created what he'd dreamed of for decades, a solo album that was authentically and unapologetically his. Titled The Other Side of Mars, the album was released on February 23, 2024. Even the name sent a clear signal: this was a version of Mars the world had never seen before. The project took nearly 4 years, with Mars involved in every detail, from writing and arrangements to selecting each collaborator with care. He enlisted longtime friends and respected musicians to help bring his vision to life. Paul Taylor, formerly of Winger and Alice Cooper, co-wrote several songs and played a major role in shaping the sound. Jacob Bunton, who had worked with LAMB and Adler, provided most of the lead vocals, bringing an emotional and dynamic edge to the record. The album also included Ray Luzier, Korn's drummer, on several tracks, bringing extra power to the rhythm section. It was produced by Michael Wageter, the same producer who had worked with Motley Crue during their Too Fast for Love era. The record kept a raw, unrefined energy, avoiding overproduction and polish. Musically, The Other Side of Mars didn't stick to the classic hair metal blueprint. Instead, Mars fused hard rock, blues rock, and hints of modern industrial sounds. Tracks like Loyal to the Lie and Right Side of Wrong prove that his talent for crafting riffs was still razor-sharp, heavy and cold, yet full of feeling. Slower, more emotional songs like Memories revealed a more introspective side of Mick Mars, one shaped by reflection, maturity, and life experience. Mars' guitar tone throughout the album was instantly recognizable, thick, dark, and deeply resonant. His solos didn't rely on flashy technical skills. They were driven by raw, unfiltered emotion, a quality Mars had always prioritized over speed or showiness. In one of his rare interviews, he explained his mindset clearly: "I'm not trying to sound like anyone else. I don't have anything to prove. I just want to play the way I want to, honestly, without apologies." Critics praised the album, with many calling it one of the most genuine releases by a veteran rocker in years. With The Other Side of Mars, Mick finally did what he couldn't in all his time with Motley Crue: tell his story, shape his own sound, and take full control of his creative path. No longer in anyone's shadow, no longer suffering quietly, Mick Mars finally stepped forward on his own terms. Off stage, Mick Mars lived a life far quieter and more complicated than the loud music he was known for. His early years were marked by struggles and broken connections. Before Motley Crue even began, he married his teenage sweetheart, Sharon Deal. They had 2 children, Les Paul Deal, named after the iconic guitar pioneer, and Stormy Deal, who would later inherit her father's battle with ankylosing spondylitis. But the years of playing low-paying gigs, combined with overwhelming financial stress, eventually ended the marriage. As Motley Crue gained momentum, Sharon left, taking the children with her and leaving Mars alone to deal with music and unpaid child support. At one point, being pulled over by police meant possible jail time for Mars because of those debts. Friends from that period remembered having to create clever workarounds to keep him out of jail between tour stops. During this turbulent time, Mars also had a son named Eric Deal through a brief relationship with local singer Marshall Martel. Unfortunately, his absence during Eric's early life created emotional distance that would be hard to fix. Even as Motley Crue reached peak fame in the 1980s, Mars' private life was falling apart. In 1990, he married again, this time to Emmy Cannon, a backing vocalist who toured with the band. But that marriage lasted just 4 years, unraveling as the band faced internal tension and Mars sank further into physical and emotional pain. Both failed marriages left more than financial damage. They also left emotional scars, memories, children he barely saw, and homes that slipped through his fingers. It wasn't until 2007, after so much time had passed, that Mars found a different kind of connection. He met Sarina Schonenberger, a Swiss model more than 30 years younger than him, after a show in Zurich. At just 22, Sarina was drawn to his quiet intensity, an almost 60-year-old man whose eyes still burned with life behind dark sunglasses. They married in 2013, and for the first time, Mick had someone beside him who wasn't there for fame or fortune, but for him. Today, they live quietly in Nashville, far from the spotlight and far from the chaos of Mars' earlier life. He spends his time writing music, recording, and walking with his wife, sometimes with a cane, sometimes just with a quiet smile. His relationships with his children remain strained by distance. Les Paul, the oldest, stays in closer contact and follows in his father's musical path. Stormy and Eric, however, have opted for private lives, keeping their distance. In a rare interview, when asked about what he regrets most, Mars responded with simple honesty: "I missed out on too many things that I can never get back. There are losses that don't make." Mick Mars stands as a simple yet powerful testament. You don't have to be loud to make a difference. Sometimes it is silence, perseverance, and loyalty to oneself that leave the most lasting impression. Have you ever quietly fought for something you believed in, just as Mick Mars has done all his life? If so, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more real life stories as inspiring as this one.